a sense of community when you're free. Rolling through the mountains, rolling through the valley, rolling through paradise with me.
Hello, everyone. Well, today's guest is an author. I believe he's written 24 books. He's also a filmmaker and a human rights activist, and I'm sure a whole bunch of other things that we'll learn about. Ladies and gentlemen, time to meet Kevin Annett. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Nancy. It's good to be here.
Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Annett, it's good, yeah.
Okay, great. So, no, I read some of the things about you on, I Googled your name, and it said that you were a former minister with the United Church, correct?
Yes, yep.
So what happened? Something happened to pull you away.
Yeah, well, I was fired without cause.
Okay, take care of it.
The story is I was ordained in 1990. A couple of years later, my young family and I ended up in Port Alberni. This would have been the summer in 1992. And I began to minister there with not only the white population, but the natives, who are a big chunk of the population, as people know, the kind of the mid-Vancouver Island area. And it was St. Andrew's United Church. I was hired by a very dwindling congregation of about 15 people. Within a year, I had that up to 100. We had a really blossoming congregation. One of the reasons was I went out into the community. I'd had a long history in Vancouver in community ministry off East Hastings. So I was really good at reaching out to people. And I reached out to the Native community as well, which was a funny thing. And it's still very much this way. It's a very divided kind of community. You don't see natives and whites mixing a lot. And it was like that when I got there. And so when I got a phone call to come out to a native home, about a week after I got there, I kind of leapt at the opportunity because I wanted to, open the doors, bring people together. And the man's name is Danny Gus. He was a retired native fisherman. And when I went there, I actually was there to marry he and his partner, Clotilda. They'd been living together 30 years, but they finally wanted to get married. So we're sitting around having lunch after. And I asked him out of the blue, I said, Danny, I noticed the whites and natives don't really mix much. There are no natives in my church, even though I know a lot of them were baptized in the United Church. Like, what's the story there? He didn't say anything. He just kept staring out the window. And I didn't know at the time, it was right next to the grounds of the old Alberni Residential School. Well, they call it a school. It was really an internment camp where children were imprisoned, and half of them never came back, as I discovered later. But anyway, he didn't say anything at first. He was looking out the window, and finally he turned to me and he said, they killed my best friend in that place. They beat him to death, and he's buried in those hills out back. And the whites in town know it, and they don't want us in their churches, right? So, that kind of blew me away. And I kept getting invited into native homes because the word got around. I opened a food bank, began to meet more people. Eventually, they began to come into the church. I invited them in, and they began to tell those stories from my pulpit. And that set off alarm bells in the church head office, because at the time, there were no lawsuits. The churches and everything were just denying everything. And they warned me. They said, don't listen to these stories. They're just making them up. They're angry at us for taking their land, all of that. But what clinched it, the reason I was fired, was not only I was opening the pulpit, as they admitted later when they, publicly defrocked me, they admitted these things, that they hadn't any problem with me until I wrote a letter. And just before I got fired, I found out that the church had been taking the land that the missionaries had stolen over the generations and selling it off to their business partners, including McMillan Blodell, a big logging company, which endows the United Church with a lot of money. And Weyerhaeuser, the big Seattle-based logging company, had just bought up McMillan Blodell. So the United Church had been taking stolen native land, handing it over to these logging companies to help their business friends. I found out about it. Then I said, wait a minute. It says in our church policy manual that you're not supposed to do that. We're supposed to return stolen land to Native nation we ripped off. Now, I was just quoting church policy. Next thing I know, there's secret meetings begin between the church officials who got this from the head office. These were orders coming down from the national office of the United Church. Virginia Coleman, Marion Best, the chief officers. All of this later came out in court cases. And a guy called John Kishore, who was the provincial forestry minister and a United Church minister, he was quoted as saying, we can't let Kevin upset the apple cart. over the housing land deal. So they went to not only the church, the faction in the church, there's about 5 or 6 people who wanted me out. They went to them, began to organize for my removal. They told everyone else I wasn't to be told. They went to my wife, Anne, and said, look, we're going to make sure this guy never works again. If you want to leave him, we'll pay for your divorce. Oh. And sure, that's exactly what happened. That unfolded. I got fired. I wasn't allowed to work, blacklisted. Anne left, got custody of my 2 daughters. And one thing led to another. So that's how it began. And while it was ripping my life apart, at the same time, Native people were hearing about this and they were coming to me. And the first healing circles were beginning. The first lawsuits were beginning. This was 95, 96. And they came to me. And in fact, I was instrumental in helping that first lawsuit happen in the BC Supreme Court. It was the first case, it was called the Brenner decision. And it allowed the churches to be sued for the harm done to the children. Now, I mean, we're talking genocide, not physical and sexual abuse. We're talking about mass murder, deliberately starving children. There was a practice, and if people want to follow this, it's in my book, murderbydecree.com. It's all online. You can download it for free. They were taking children as a regular practice, putting them in the healthy with the sick, kids who had TB and smallpox, and then never treating them and letting them die off en masse. That's why the death rate was over 50% for half a century. Now, to give you a sense of that, in Auschwitz and Treblinka, in the Nazi death camps, the average death rate was half of that, about 25, 30%. Here we have on average half the children. Imagine in a schoolyard, half the children dead after the first season. And that was considered an acceptable death rate. We've got letters. You know, if you read that, it's mind-blowing. But unfortunately, a lot of this stuff is being suppressed in Canada. So, I mean, that was a long way to answer your question, but that's really how it began for me. And a lot of things happened after that, which really kind of vindicated all the work we were doing, right?
Right. Because I know, like I read where they're trying to, at one point, they're trying to say, like, all the information you have is just false information. You have no proof of anything. That's way early on, right?
Right. Well, I mean, it's funny they say that because even the government and church funded Truth and Reconciliation Commission. They set up an investigation to look into themselves, basically. They were quoting my stuff all the time. Murray Elliott, the head of the TRC, right when they issued their final report in 2016, he said, yes, half the children died. Gary Morasti, a member of parliament, got up and quoted my film, Unrepentant, which we released in 2007, showed the eyewitnesses describing burying children. Being part of sterilization programs where they were put under x-ray machines. If you were native and spoke your own language and wouldn't go to church, you were sterilized. I mean, that's a definition of genocide under international law. You're trying to prevent them from breeding the targeted group. And so all of the evidence is there. It's this usual kind of smear and fear campaign at work, right?
Right, yeah. It's so hard because, like, it's hard to get people to listen and to not be brainwashed by the politicians and the church or whatever, right?
Well, and you know, it's interesting, Nancy, because when we first released Unrepentant, I took it all over the native world and all over the wide world. It went viral on the internet, about 250,000 hits, and it's really one of the things that forced the apology in 2008 in Ottawa. They knew they had to address it in some way, although they never acknowledged the bad stuff. But when I took the film into communities, it was interesting, the reaction, because when you're sitting there watching it, it starts by having a lot of these native survivors describing the horrible things done to them as children. And you're watching people's reaction and they're stone-faced. Because, I mean, how can most people relate to, you know, being sterilized, burying your best friend when you're 8 years old, being starved every day? They couldn't. But at the part of the film where I described how they went to my wife and offered to pay for her to leave me, the audience would often go, oh, just gasp in astonishment, because people can relate to that. They can understand that. And that's why after a while I stopped saying native children died, and I said just children. These are children, you know, and because native people in Canada are still kind of exotic and alien to a lot of whites, and we don't have a lot of contact with them, and there's just the stereotypes of who they are. So yeah, we got to find the bottom line here, which is these were children, and not one person has ever been brought to trial for the death of over 60,000 of them. So I mean, that's an abomination right there, you know.
I agree. I talked with my sisters. Like I was born in New Brunswick in 1948, and when I was
Oh,
really
yeah.
young, like before 8 years old, we knew something was happening. I don't know why my
Yeah.
family knew, but we knew something was happening to the indigenous people. We didn't know what it was or even how we knew, you
Yeah.
know. And then when it comes to light, as you get older, it's like, oh, that's what we were hearing.
Yeah.
Only it was just whispers for some
Well,
reason.
you in New Brunswick, you'd be near Shubenacadie, which was the big Catholic. You see, I don't like calling them schools because they never got much education.
Yeah,
I
right,
call them internment camps or even death camps
right.
when you think of the death rate going on there.
Mhm.
Most kids never got any schooling. They were used as cheap labor. They were given just enough to be like functional slaves,
Right.
and they were farmed out. Often children were sent out as laborers in the fields. Principals got kickbacks from local farmers and others to hire out slave labor from among these children. That's why so many of them died. And the Mounties since at least 1960 have been systematically going around digging up and destroying the graves, destroying documents. We found this all out. It all came out in not only my defrocking trial, but other court cases we brought. It was all admitted. But
Right.
now they're burying it again. They're wiping this out of the memory of Canadians. So that's why these interviews are so important to keep this memory alive. Because if you don't look at your history, it'll repeat itself, as I think it is, right?
Like I try to post things when I know, when I know some facts on Facebook, and it's like one thing I've heard is like there are people who think that's all a fake, and my question to them is, what is fake? Is the schoolyard, the graveyards in those schools fake, or the bodies being in there fake? And if it's not the children whose bodies are, and it's always white people, of course.
Right. Well,
Who
it's denial. I mean,
yeah,
like I often find working with people who are dying, there's stages of grief.
yeah,
First there's anger and then denial. And I think as a people, we're in that phase. We're denying what we did and everything, but then eventually the truth comes around. I mean, 25 years ago, when I and a few Native people in Vancouver started this campaign, nobody was ever using the word genocide. They weren't even talking about dead Native children. Now even the Pope and the Prime Minister admitting to genocide, which actually should mean they should be in front of a war crimes trial for admitting that.
mhm,
But you see, you use a word and you get the idea out there long enough, even if you're just a few people, eventually it comes around and people start acknowledging it. It just takes amazing perseverance, right?
right. Yeah, one thing I watched, I think was one of your videos where you said, we use the word abuse, but it wasn't abuse, right? As you
No.
say, it was the out and out murder in
Well,
some cases.
on the front of my book, this is a little girl called Vicky Stewart.
Okay,
And I got this from her family, Charlotte
right,
and Burl, the two sisters. She was incarcerated in the United Church Indian School in Edmonton. And when she was 9 years old, this is 1958 in April, she was coming in from recess too slow. So a supervisor named Ann Kaniski picked up a 2x4, hit her on the back of the head, knocked her cold. That night, she died in her sleep. And Burl and Charlotte told me both face to face that they were there when her body came back. They lived up near Prince Rupert, and her body was in a coffin, a little coffin, and the top of the head was missing. There was no brain because they removed the brain so there'd be no evidence that she was hit. Official cause of death, tuberculosis. They would often say that, right, because it's so common in the Native world. But
yeah,
that's one example out of 60,000, right?
right. I think what's so hard for people to grasp is that the number of people who maybe they weren't one of the direct, like doing the harm themselves, but they were there. They didn't speak
Yeah.
up. They, like
Yeah.
that. I know that happens a lot where people just sort of sit by and don't say anything for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But how can you not? Like, where's those people cannot have a conscience? None of those people could have a conscience, right?
Well, I know it's a hard thing to admit, but a lot of people don't have conscience right away. It's got to be developed. And like when I was in the way it developed in me is I had to lose a lot, and my life was trashed, and there was kind of like a void. It's almost like being pregnant, like there's this void and something new starts growing in you. And I couldn't look away. I had a choice. They gave me several opportunities to cooperate. They said, when they fired me, out of the blue in January 95, they came in and they said, you got to have psychiatric evaluation, right?
Yeah.
Making me look crazy.
Yeah.
You've got to have retraining for a year, even though I had 2 children to support, right? Unpaid training. I mean, ludicrous. But I could have gone along, and then none of this stuff would ever be known. But I couldn't, in conscience, look my face in the mirror and look at my children one day and help cover up the murder of children. So to me, that was just what any conscious, caring person would do. But then you had to keep asking yourself, well, as they ramp it up and they take away your children and they prevent you from working and they blacken your name all over the country and they physically assault you and they try, all of that happened. Do you keep going? After a while, it's interesting because it becomes easier to keep going.
It does.
Because it's all you got in your life, and so it becomes, and especially meeting all the people around me, the people I worked with, the Native people, with far greater suffering, and yet they were still out there. They had the courage to come with me and stand outside churches and protest, and they're the ones who made this thing happen. So if we were holding each other up,
yes.
and that's how you do it. You do it together, not just as the lone hero, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. I just think, even within my family, some of us, we talk about it, but there's others that they deflect all the time. When talking about what some of the things that happen in it, when they'll say like, well, look at how they are in the reserves, how the chiefs have all of this, like, it's that deflection all the time. And I'm thinking, what has that got to do with anything that I'm saying,
I know. And now there's some truth there. The chiefs on a reservation have a pretty high standard of living, but that doesn't condemn the 99% of the people who don't. As a matter of fact, when we started this campaign, it was the chiefs who were opposing us, looking for the graves of children.
Right.
One of the reasons is when the chiefs were little kids, you see, in these camps they call residential schools, if you collaborated, if you ratted out the other kids, if you were given special treatment, you were in a protected group, you got better education and better food, you survived. Like a lot of kids died literally of starvation. One, Delmar Johnny, my couch and friend on Vancouver Island, said the only reason he survived is he was on the garbage detail and he could shovel garbage into his mouth as he took it to the dump. Everybody else, they had no food. They just starved these kids to live. So those chiefs were protected. They were in that group. When they get older, they don't want the truth coming out because they often help bury the other kids. They used my friend Harriet Nahani, who helped start this movement with me, Pachi, that woman from Vancouver Island. She said that when she got to Port Alberni, after all the kids in her village were just grabbed and they were carted off to Port Alberni. And she said they were standing in the rain. They're naked in the rain, 300 children. And they just, hold on, my battery's running low.
Okay.
I don't want us to conk out.
No, I don't want us to conk out either.
Anyway, sorry about that. Harriet said they're standing in the rain, naked. Their heads are being shaved. There's these well-dressed Native boys off to the side holding clubs. And Harriet turned and spoke to her cousin in her language, and the boy came over and hit her on the shoulder and said, "Don't talk the heathen language." And you see, so they created this divide and conquer immediately. And you see that today in every Native family, and people are at each other because they're trained to attack each other, and then the white rulers can sit back and go, "Oh well, look, it's not our problem," right? Yeah. It's a classic tactic you use.
It's a form of brainwashing in a way, right? Yeah, because I figured, like, I was brought up in the Catholic Church, and I feel I was brainwashed, and I deprogrammed myself in my teens, because I could no longer believe because of some of the things I'm seeing and hearing, and when you start thinking with your brain, your own brain, you see the world differently, right?
Yeah, that's right. And
yeah,
go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that you said in one of the emails that we were corresponding, you said there's a remedy for this. Did you say that to me?
Yes.
What is that? What can we do?
Well, over the years we've done it. We forced the apology. We forced them to admit to things and offer limited reparations. We even got I should give you a bit of history. When we forced the apology after about 10 or 15 years of work, constant campaigning, going into churches on Sunday morning, talking to people. The churches began to panic. And so the government got pressured into issuing the quote apology. After that, my name got blacked out of the media. There was a big censorship and ban on everything we had done.
Oh,
Because they put in the official spin. They said, oh yeah, some bad things happened, but it wasn't genocide, right? Like they spun the whole issue. And right at that same time, I got invited over to Europe, to Ireland, I was actually visiting relatives there, but these survivors of the Catholic Church crimes over there invited me to meetings. I'm telling you, sitting there in Dublin with these people, it was like listening to Native people. The same tortures, medical experiment, drug testing on little kids in Catholic orphanages. They just found in a place called Tuam on the west coast of Ireland, they just found a mass grave of 800 babies at a former Catholic orphanage. Some of them were missing their heads. I mean, like it was just bizarre. All of this stuff began coming out, and we formed a tribunal, International Tribunal of Crimes of Church and State, to unite survivors of these crimes across borders. We eventually brought a court case in Europe against Pope Benedict, forced him out of office in 2013, along with 3 other cardinals. And I mean, if that isn't having an impact, it's like it was a cumulative thing over many years. And so we show that if people are determined enough and with enough knowledge, then yeah, we can force change. One thing we're doing, to give you an example, the first thing is education. So urge people to get the information, murderbydecree.com, write to me. I'm constantly on speaking tour and helping people organize on this stuff. But on September 10th, 11th, 12th, we're having these 3 days in Vancouver and everywhere. We're asking people to hold vigils at these churches, the Catholic, Anglican, United churches, tell people not to put money in the collection plate because these are genocidal bodies and you're funding crimes against humanity. You're not allowed to do that under international law.
right.
Vote with your feet, in other words. We're asking the Vancouver City Council to nullify privileges and tax exemptions for these churches. Those are the things, unfortunately, that's what they understand, money and public image. You threaten that and they start, admitting things. So it's a very important public measure to do. But I think on a broader level, we've got to get this information into the school curriculum.
Right.
So if you know teachers, I've got a whole curriculum package for teachers to use in grade 11 and 12 First Nation studies. I love speaking in high schools and colleges because the young people are very enthusiastic when they hear something about an injustice. They want to do something right away, right?
Yes.
So that's another thing people can do, just education on the ground and learning that if it happened to them, it can easily happen to us, as I think it is in some of the recent police state measures that we've been encountering. They base it all on what they did to the natives. I say to people, if you don't like mandatory vaccinations and injections, that's been the law in Canada towards Indians since 1874. Because if you're living on an Indian reservation, you can't refuse medical treatment or you go to jail. And they had to have special passes to leave the reservation, like a vaccine passport. I mean, they try it out on one group and then they know they can do it on everybody. So we're all affected by this. That's the point, right?
Right. And I know that at least up to 2019, they were sterilizing young indigenous women, and by using threats, like they would go in and have they're pregnant, they have their baby. Well, we're going to take your baby away from it unless you get sterilized.
Well, as a matter of fact, when you look at my film Unrepentant, and I'll send you the link to this. Remember that little girl, Vicky Stewart, who died, her sister Charlotte Stewart? Well, in the same interview, Charlotte said in 1997, in North Vancouver, where I was living, social services came to me and said I had to have a tubal ligation if I wanted to see my children again. In other words, you got to be sterilized if you want to see your own children. How can they can they imagine them doing that to a white woman?
No.
You see, they can do it to natives because they're not citizens under the law in Canada. They're under the Indian Act. They're wards of the crown, which means you can kill an Indian and there's no legal consequences. Why police kill them all the time and they never go to jail. Yeah. Or sterilize their women and nothing ever happened. So that's the two standards at work, and it's lethal. It can be applied to anybody all of a sudden. Right?
Yeah. One thing I would encourage people to just go to a healing ceremony if they ever get a chance. I've been to one, and it's so impactful to see how they're trying to heal them, not only themselves from the trauma, but their children. Because I know personally, when you're abused as a child, you have that trauma and you bring it forward with you.
Yeah,
and
it's true.
And pass that on to your children a lot of the time. And I see the Native community, we don't have anything like that in my society that I know of, where they're trying to heal themselves and heal their whole their whole community. And I think it's just it makes me want to cry, but I think at the same time, it's such a beautiful thing to do, right? Like,
well, I know, and there's a lot of goodwill among people on the ground, among our people, and as part of the society that did the crime, we have an obligation to do more than just give verbal apologies, which don't mean anything, and a bit of money, which goes. I mean, what really we've got to show people that we're willing to, give up and risk ourselves, and that means looking at our own crimes, putting our own people on trial, which we did in those tribunals in Europe, and then our work here in Canada. But here's the problem: people have that goodwill, they want to change, but then you hit the ceiling of the way it's set up in Canada, because the chiefs are all told you won't get any funding if you talk about murdered children. You can now because the government put out their spin on it, saying, oh yeah, we looked in graves and we didn't find much. I mean, it's like asking the serial killer to dig under his own house and tell us what he found, right? There's not going to be honesty or disclosure. So it's up to the people themselves to do that. We need our own inquiries and do the right thing among each other, and not look to the government or the churches, because they're all implicated in this crime, right?
Yeah.
Police.
Yeah.
Everybody.
We don't believe them a lot of politicians, we don't believe them in other things. Why would we believe anything about what they say about this? That's my thought anyway, right?
Well, you're right, especially since in Canada, every member of parliament takes an oath of allegiance not to us, but to King Charles and his descendants. Nobody else. That makes them unaccountable to us completely, right?
It's insanity.
I know.
We elect them to do this, so that's another issue for sure. We're going to run out of time soon, and we're probably going to listen. I'm going to have you back on when you have some more time. I know you're busy.
Anytime, Nancy. Yeah.
So I don't know which link to share because there's so many different ones. But as soon as I finish this is going to air tomorrow. Okay. But I know that people can find you just by Googling your name, because that's how I did it.
Well, I'll give you the main links. murderbydecree.com.
Oh, that one's okay. Okay.
And I do a blog show on Sundays.
Okay.
3 p.m. Pacific.
Right.
It's bbsradio.com/Here We Stand. That's the name of our show.
Okay.
3 p.m. Sundays.
Murder by Decree.
I'll send all these to you as well. And people can write to me at angelfire101 at protonmail.com. Angelfire101 at protonmail.com. Here's a book I urge people to get. I've written 24 books, and this is a recent one. You can get it off Amazon or from me, because I'm in the Greater Vancouver area. Crimes Against Humanity in Canada, the Evidence. And this tells about not only a summary of the crime with the evidence and the links, but our campaign and what we forced out over 15 years, and how we use me as a test case to show how they can legally destroy somebody's life, even if you're a white man, a professional. They completely obliterated my family, my livelihood, and it's important to know how it happens to stop it from happening again. So that's a really good little handbook to have people can order. It's a good way to start the education, right?
Right. Yeah, for sure. Right. Well, thank you. Just stay on camera for a second, please. Just thank you to the audience. You've been listening to Kevin Annett, and I'm going to share his link. So check it out. This is really, really important to us, not only to the First Nation, but to us, because we have to stand up, I think, and speak. And if we don't, then we're culpable. That's my thought anyway. On that note, people, take care and peace out. Well, find the off button.
A sense of community, till the wax a place to be. A sense of community when you're free. Rolling through the mountains, rolling through the valley, rolling through paradise with me. It's multicultural, you're sure to see it all. Chilliwack's the place to be, you'll see. Come party in the park, go dancing after dark. Chilliwack's the place to be, you'll see.